Hey, what's up, everybody? Um, Composer, musician Brian Ralston here. For those of you that don't know, I'm making this video to talk about a very difficult topic. This is initially not how I conceived of this video. Um, so originally, I wanted to do a roundtable discussion, and we were going to do that this weekend. And when this started to become a reality with a bunch of people, everybody at the last minute got cold feet in wanting to talk about what I'm going to talk about. And ironically, that is part of what needs to be talked about. so I actually changed course and I thought, you know what? Instead of dragging other people through this kind of with me, I figured I would make a video on my own about my own personal opinion on this, coming to you. Particularly, this is focused at the LA scoring community, California scoring community, but mainly that's Los Angeles. And coming to you not only as a composer, but as a musician, as a trumpet player, as a piano player, as someone who used to be a full AFM union member, and went to meetings and participated and tried to even participate for change and all this other stuff. And then, the union came up with this whole dual capacity member thing, where basically if you are a member that, I'm a member not because I'm a composer, I'm a member because I'm a trumpet player, I'm a member because I'm a conductor, because I'm an orchestrator. But as a composer, they see me as an agent of the employer. And so they essentially said, if you're dual capacity, you can no longer be at meetings when we talk about issues that deal with, contract stuff. You can't vote on stuff that deals with contracts. You can't, because you're an agent of the employer. You're like an enemy in our midst. And so what they essentially did is they made us, de facto Beck status or FICOR people. I mean, they essentially said, you can be here when we give out our 50-year pins, and then if you have something you want to say, you can say it, and then you have to leave. And then we're going to talk about and vote on and do other things that are important in our community that you can't be a part of because of this dual capacity thing. So that and the Austin Winery scenario, which I'll mention a little bit later, but really kind of led me to say, you know what, I'm not going to allow my family to be made an example of, dragging through stuff. And the bylaws are the bylaws, right? We signed the bylaws. We agree to the bylaws contractually to be a member. And you have stuff in the bylaws that specifically says I can't be a composer on stuff, even though you don't represent me as a composer. So a lot of people, just at least composer people, essentially went FICOR, Beck status, right? So that we could still do the union gigs that we have to do, right? If we get on a signatory project, we have to be on a union gig. You do that, or we still do our sci-fi channel film, which is never going to be union, and we can still do that, and no one can bring us up on charges, and because we're not violating bylaws, we're not a member, right? So we're not bound by it. But the reason I'm making this video today is there's an elephant in the room that no one wants to discuss. And out of my love for this industry and passion for this industry, wanting to see it not get worse, but get better and to get healthier and to compete globally. And all the musicians, the young generation of musicians, the friends and colleagues and people that I work with and of course the amazing legacy musicians we have in this town, like I want to see things get better. And there's this thing that's out there that no one wants to talk about. No one wants to come on here and talk about it with me. No one wants to propose how we change things. And, it kind of hit me the other day. In politics, for example, especially now, pandemic, many of us talk about doing the right thing, right? We've become very polarized, but one thing that a lot of people, especially in this industry, especially in the state, talk about is doing the right thing. They take a morality position on confronting others' behavior and their tactics and how they express that towards others, right? Um, we've often now come to shame those who just stand by the sidelines and don't get involved, right? Because we feel like it's almost, you're either with us or against us, and we do that with the pandemic stuff, and we've become fed up with so many people not wearing masks because of that impact on each other. And for better or worse, whether you agree with someone over an issue or not, in politics or whatever, people they're unfriending each other over these differing beliefs and expressions of disagreement in social media. In real life, right? Friendships are being hurt in real life. I get all of that. But knowing that behavior, knowing how society is going, knowing a lot of you in our industry do that. Take those stances. You're passionate about standing up for what is right, what is moral, when people exert behavior that is poor, when people treat each other badly, right? We have the BML issues this year, and racial issues and discriminatory issues, and the strong picking on the weak. I mean, a number, you can think of anything, right? And people are saying it's no longer acceptable to stand by, to sit by, and to not say anything. But let me ask you this. Why are we then not equally offended by the behavior of some of the decades-old leaders in this town and fellow musicians in our professional community here in Los Angeles that do a lot of these intimidation tactics? Why are we not equally offended with the mentality that creates division and pits working musician against working musician in the name of pursuit of some solidarity thing? Does that behavior actually create solidarity? Or does it actually create the very division that we talk about wanting to solve, right? Why have members of the RMA repeatedly been on the front lines of policing dark dates, reporting on each other, whatever the issue is, recording session or whatever, and yet these are the same people who repeatedly do dark dates and don't follow the AFM bylaws themselves? Some have even gone overseas to perform, conduct. We all know the stories, right? And it's strictly forbidden in the AFM bylaws to do anything overseas, anything that's not a union gig, right? Unless the AFM specifically has permit, and yet we do this. And then we know the people who have done it. And yet we say nothing because we're afraid. We're afraid of what they could do. We don't want to be on that dark list, right? But conversely, some young musician, 20-something-year-old, whatever, violin player does some session that we think was non-union, but we don't really know for sure. Or maybe some session at home over the pandemic. They're putting together a scenario where they can record remotely for everybody. And they get reported for doing a dark date or something non-union, right? Look at the Austin Winery case in the scenario, right? Austin's case is pretty famous. He talked about it on this video eloquently, right, on YouTube that everybody can look out. That video, by the way, has been viewed over 118,000 times. Talk about a reach, right? Getting the word out. But anyway, why is this double standard okay? Why? I tend to think that most of you as union musicians believe it is not okay, if you really think about it. But then why is everyone afraid to confront it or talk about it or simply come on here and talk about it, talk about how to make our community healthy, talk about the problems we have, talk about why dark dates exist, the reality of why they exist, why people do them? The pandemic isn't making that go away. Everybody is buying recording gear to record at home, right? It's once we prove to people that we don't need to put a big orchestra in a room anymore. What do you think's going to, do you think that's going to, they don't need to put 50 people in a room anymore. Look at the Animaniacs and Warner Brothers. It's like recording this orchestra piecemeal, one musician at a time, and piecing it together in Pro Tools. And it sounds like an orchestra. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not the exact same thing we're used to, but they're making it work. So, it's rhetorical to ask why no one wants to talk about it. I know why. Everyone's afraid of damaging their own self-interest. The composers, like they've all moved on because this is not their fight. This is not our fight. We don't. And so many belong to boards and organizations and SCL, Alliance of Women Film Composers, all this other stuff, right? I'm not like the RMA, the film, Motion Picture Academy, Television Academy. People I've reached out to that believe in this message, and I'm not dogging them, but believe me, I have empathy for that, and that's fine. But the young musicians are afraid because they don't want to get on anyone's do not hire list. And yes, do not hire lists exist. Don't believe me? Right? International unfair list on AFM, right? Ironically, electronic arts. Why do we have electronic arts on there? Really? Shouldn't we be trying to, get them to want to be a signatory, right? Collective Media Guild. Well, Collective Media Guild shut down, right? Cinema scoring. Come on. These are your fellow musicians who are just trying to make a living. I find it really interesting that the California Electronic Arts was placed by local 57, Nashville. And if you go down to Tennessee, Nashville Music Scoring was put on the list request of local 47 because they're competing with each other. I mean, come on, people, right? But do not work lists do exist, right? This is the AFM's local website. Do not work for these people. They've they don't treat people right, or they've done. Now, if someone signed a contract or signed an agreement and actually violated the contractual agreement, I get that, but can't we work this out? Can't we figure this out? Right? Do we really need to be sending contractors in town strike authorization letters to threaten them because their groups are, hiring FICOR-based musicians or Beck status musicians? Do we need to, be pitting out individual contractors because of what they do? And yet these exact same contractors are the people that we're doing shenanigans with, right? On the AFM's own website, if you look down in the bottom corner, right, report dark dates. They have a whole phone number dedicated to this stuff, right? What are we doing? What is this? Who thinks this is an actual strategy to go after your fellow musicians? I don't really understand it. Oh, and there's a nice little web form where you can anonymously report dark dates. I mean, is this like the musician's version of squatting? Where you call or swatting, I guess it is, where you call the SWAT team and say that there's some gunfire at the house down the street, so you can get back in, and the SWAT team arrives and does whatever. You can anonymously report dark dates on the web. Great, right? That's exactly what your fellow musicians need when they're just trying to pay the bill in this pandemic, right? So this to me is the elephant in the room, and it's this whole talk is not actually about dark dates. It's about that mentality. It's about how we treat each other and the musicians that we are fellow musicians, and it's the infighting, right? The first step to solving a problem anytime is admitting that you have one. And in my opinion, we need to stop turning our enforcement mentality on each other. Stop it, and start going. Stop going after musicians, composers, the dual capacity people, the academies, and they're contractors, musicians that are just trying to put food on the table for their families and entertain people, for goodness sakes. We're not solving world peace. We're not building nuclear devices. We're making music. This is supposed to be happy stuff. This is supposed to make us feel good. And for goodness sakes, in 2020, we need to feel good, right? And have empathy for our fellow musicians. Not because some contractor's not hiring us or some composer's not hiring us and blah, 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 so I'm going to report you. Right? No. Anyway, we need to recognize, this is the key, that it's our community's failed leadership. The music community's failed leadership over the years. And the RMA, I'm looking at you in particular, right, has caused virtually no one to want to work with us in LA unless they're already in some signatory agreement that they have to work with us. Look at the example of the epic failure of the 2012 video game agreement, right? That was promulgated by the IEB and just pushed onto people. The agreement had no basis and reality of how the video game world functions, who wanted that agreement? No one wanted that agreement. No one. And yet they pushed that thing and no one used it. No one. And guess what happened? Video games got bigger, budgets got bigger. It was an industry that grew, and guess where all that stuff is being done now? London and Nashville. Nashville, by the way, which has an RMA branch and has, a member, their Nashville AFM president on the IEB, and yet some of the biggest non-union stuff is being done in Nashville because Nashville musicians basically said, don't screw with us or we'll all go FICOR. And EFM, okay. Right? But now that video agreement has been replaced by a new one not long ago, right? And who introduced it? A lot of the younger members in the AFM, in the union. People, like my colleague Noah Gladstone and a lot of those people that know how the industry works and introduce contracts that worked. And now gradually people are coming back. They're starting to use the contract again because it makes a lot more sense, right? Think of this. The AFM barely has any signatories, right? SAG, they like to look at the other sister unions in the entertainment industry because they got this in their contract, they got that in their contract, and they negotiated this bump step up fee for whatever, so this is what we need, right? That's their strategy. But you know what? SAG has hundreds and hundreds of signatories, full-time signatories. Do you know how many the AFM has? Was it 5? I think it was 6, but then Disney bought Fox, and so now it's 5, right? I mean, it's utter ridiculous, the amount of people. Now, any production company can sign a one-off and do that production without committing everything to being a signatory, right? The director I'm working on a film right now, I'm talking with him about the possibility of doing an AFM indie because I want some very specific musicians to play, and these are union musicians. And we might end up using the indie festival contract. And that's, because we want these people. We want these specific people, and that's how you can get them, right? There's only one Tom Hanks. You got to do a SAG contract to get Tom Hanks. It's kind of the same argument from the musician perspective, right? But, in the long run, I really worry for our infrastructure in this town. And once that goes, and once the work can't support that, and so we've already lost Taddeo with CBS Radford. We've already lost Paramount Stage M, which was torn down, right? The bridge looks like it might be coming back online under Silent Zoo Studios or whatever. So maybe at the top of the year, which is great. I hope they succeed. I absolutely want to record at Abbey Road in my future. I want to record at Vienna Synchron Stage one day. Who wouldn't? Those are awesome places to go. This is a world community right now, right? But who among us that actually live in Los Angeles does not want to sleep in our own beds, have dinner with our own families, have breakfast with our own families, right? I want to kiss my daughter goodbye in the morning before I go to work and then drive across town to work with some amazing musicians. Who doesn't want to do that, right? I long for the opportunities to develop relationships with the wonderful musicians here in town. I mean, think about composers years ago, the James Horners, right? When they scored everything in town, they hired the same orchestra of people year after year after year. And all of a sudden, for 2 decades, it was the same people playing for him. The communication between what he wanted and what the musicians would give him, it was virtually silent. They knew what he wanted. And all they had to do, it's a look. It's a whatever. It's, oh, there's that line again, right? We're familiar with that. Oh, he did it differently this way. And that rapport with musicians is next to none. To be recording our scores in all these random places around the world because whoever's the cheapest of the day, right, is not necessarily getting us and our productions the best product. We know that, right? But who doesn't want to be able to record right here in town? I push to do that all the time, but we as composers don't have, as you know, and again, I'm talking to mostly the musicians, right? And the AFM musicians, young musicians, right? we don't have that final say. We cannot sign the assumption agreement. Only the studios can. Only the studios can. And so we have such amazing resources here, and yet we're all stuck fighting amongst ourselves quietly behind the scenes. No one wants to talk about. Reporting on each other, buying tracking devices, putting them on the cars of union contractors to find out where non-union sessions are happening so they can be reported. I'm not kidding. Intimidating members who fight back when falsely accused about sessions, falsely charged about sessions. Like, what are we doing? Are we pressuring musicians for their 1099 info to prove that there were sessions with union people were done non-union? Are you kidding me? Do you know where all this comes from? It comes from the top. The top of what? Well, there's an organization that's repeatedly taken an active role in the strong arm tactics that the union does. Ask yourself who that is. If you don't know, it's not that hard to figure out. But you know what? Most of you already know. You've heard one of these stories, or two, or all of them, or maybe you've never heard them before. Maybe this part of that underbelly in the town that you've never heard about, in the whole dark date thing and reporting on each other and, you know, all that other stuff. It's just, I don't know. It's just mind-boggling to me. Here's another example of misinformation regarding the recent AB 2257. Many of you know I was very vocal about California's AB5 law, which initially, of course, had nothing to do with musicians, but trapped musicians by how it was written, to basically saying, you know, you're not exempt from this law and you have to continue to be hired, or now you're going to be as defaulted to be hired to be an employee. And of course, the union loves this because union musicians, any union, by the way, they're paid as employees. They are W-2 employees. And so the unions were all for AB5. They don't let the union in general tell you that they were trying to fight for exemptions for you, right? There were independent musicians in that room, right? The Ari Herstans, the Karen Garrity, right, from Collective Media Guild, who the union's so poor, right? No, these are the people that were actually fighting for you in that room, trying to get musicians exempted. And there were certain areas that they just couldn't get the AFM exempted, or AFM to agree to the exemption, right? So what got exempted was recording musicians, right? The only ones that the RMA would really care about, right? So, you know, there's a website where RMA leader describes what happened with that whole thing, which to me is not exactly the truth. They're trying to paint it in a way like they had something to do with it, but they didn't. This leader proposed a compromise that would allow musicians to go back to the Borrello ruling. Ultimately, that approach was incorporated into AB 2257, which is now the law of the land in California. No, AB 5 was a set of rules defaulting everyone to employee status. You had to pass the ABC test, three-pronged test in AB 5 to become or remain an independent contractor. Other than that, you're defaulted to an employee. That ruling always sat on top of Borrello. It never threw away Borrello. So if you are now exempted by AB5, you are still covered under Borrello. Borrello is a 35-year-old law that talks about the hiring standards and who's an employee and who's an independent contractor. And the thing about Borrello is different is that the Borrello test, you don't have to meet all the requirements. You just kind of have to look at the forest for the trees. There might be one that you would fail, but ultimately you look at the relationship and you go, yeah, that's a one-off. That's a single musician coming in for 2 hours. That's not an employee. Okay, that's fine. You pass the test. You can be paid as an independent contractor, right? But AB5 did away with that and made it all or nothing. You had to pass all three to be an independent contractor. Otherwise, you default to employee status, right? But Borrello never went away. So the people that were exempted in AB5, like doctors and lawyers and all this other stuff, now default back to Borrello. So any exemption in AB5, musician exemption, was not the brainchild to fall back to Borrello by someone at the RMA. That's how the law is already written. So and quite frankly, most musicians the AFM represents are not exempted from AB5 because most musicians the AFM exempts or represents are not scoring recording musicians. They're the live musicians that play in live venues and orchestras and everything and all this other stuff. That's where most of the people are. It's not the recording community. The recording community has most of the money, but most of the people are not exempt under AB5. And why wouldn't the union agree to that? Because they want those musical theater places, whatever, to sign union contracts. And I get that. I don't like, coming out against AB5, I was very, people think I'm anti-union sometimes because I'm not anti-union. I used to be in the union. I am fine with the union people getting together, using their efforts to, negotiate stuff on their behalf as a collective whole. Like, all that stuff is fine. Where I start to have a problem is when the union starts telling me or other people that they can't do their job. You have to do it union, or you can't be hired as an independent contractor because that affects our union business. No, that's where I start to have a problem, is when their working model starts to impact the freedom of other people's working model. So anyway, side note, but AB 55, that was not the victory being claimed there for the musician exemption on 2257 is a farce. It frankly, it is. So, getting back, why, it's about this side. The musicians. That's what this is about. It's about the wonderful musicians in this town, many of whom are no longer in the RMA, right? If you're a musician in Los Angeles, particularly a union musician, I'm asking you as a fellow musician and someone who loves this music community and only wants to see it get stronger on the world stage and shine like it used to, think good and hard about the people that you allow to speak for you and lead you. The RMA as a players conference came about ironically when session musicians thought the AFM was not making decisions in their best interest. So they tried to form their own union of just recording musicians. And the AFM took them to labor court. The AFM won, said, you can't do that. We already represent you. But what it did do is it made the RMA a players conference within the AFM. Okay, so as a players conference, they're going to provide advice and input on the session community and those session contracts that the AFM controls nationally, right? But today, the RMA as an organization, in my personal opinion, has utterly failed the AFM scoring community. They focus on what is best for their small little clique of membership, their 100-plus people, and not the AFM musicians as a whole. This stat proves it. Their membership a decade ago was over 1,200 members. Today is dwindled down to 181 members. 181 members. In contrast, AFM Local 47 has over 5,600 active members. You outnumber them by a lot. Think about that. Are they and their failed leadership going to control your future? That's what you have. The RMA's drop to 181 members is a reflection and acknowledgement of its failed leadership as an organization. Its failed tactics and position on the issues that matter most to the members of the AFM. That stat alone is damning evidence, and everybody knows it. Look at their actions as an organization. Give it some thought. The future is yours to decide not only how you want things to be, but how you want as a community to treat your fellow musicians, composers, and contractors just doing their craft. And who is going to lead you? Think about this. Here's a video for you.
Wouldn't they be more inclined to work with the AFM if they felt like they weren't being publicly maligned?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody gives you anything because they like you. In the union business, they give you things because they are afraid of what you're going to do to them.
Really? Do I need to play that again? It's famous, right? They give things to you because they're afraid of what you're going to do to them. Is this a strategy? I ask you. There was a listen up campaign that the AFM did a while back, in connection with the RMA and everything else. I thought it was totally named wrong. I think it should be not listen up, but listen down. When you're teaching musicians, when you're teaching kids in school to listen, where you're teaching them to listen across the orchestra, you're teaching them to tune and listen down to the foundation of the root of the chord. You're teaching them to listen to each other. And I think, I find irony in this campaign that they did a while back about Listen Up, when I felt that campaign should have been pointed inward and listen down. Listen to your members, listen to the bulk of the people and what they're wanting, not the one or two people at the top. And then do what you're going to do. As you look to affect change in your future here in Los Angeles, are you going to be one of those people that stands on a street corner protesting in a clown costume? Or are you going to be holding your head up high and earning the respect because you are damn good at what you do? And you're so professional and easy to work with, the studios and networks would be foolish from a business perspective to go anywhere else. Your competition is now global. The monopoly of unions break down outside of their jurisdiction when things are global. You know this already. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. You've seen this and what it does over the last decade or two yourselves. You now compete with people who don't have to play by the same rules. And standing on street corners in costume with a dozen other people with sloppy, hard-to-read homemade signs arguing for how things used to be while attempting to shame the very people who you're trying to convince to hire you has proven an utter failure of a strategy and failure of leadership. Are you going to choose to be a part or want more of that? Or are you going to choose differently? Perhaps choose wisely. So, again, I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to leave you with thoughts from a fellow musician. You know, we play many roles, many hats. Sometimes I'm playing on the session right with you. Sometimes I'm the one that has to hire for the session. This world has changed. It is so different now. You know, bylaws, I think, need to be rewritten. I think contracts need to be readjusted, looked at who is our main competition. And if our contract matched theirs, what do you have that they don't have? You have proximity to Hollywood. And if it costs the exact same thing to play there and play here, you're going to want to wake up in your own bed and drive across town and do the amazing things that we used to do. And the people that are leading us have to recognize that. And they have to understand that the way to get this community and the way to get this town healthy again is to start thinking differently. And to stop putting the same failed leadership in charge. And to start putting some new people that had some new thoughts, like the new young people that saved that video game catastrophe with the current agreement that bailed out the old agreement from 2012 that was a disaster. Start listening down. And most of the people that I hope are watching this now or listening to this now in the LA scoring community, mostly musicians, young musicians, you're who I'm talking to about listening down. And I'm not talking about down to you. I'm just saying, you're not on the top call list, let's say, for that, but your voice matters. And what you want matters. And it's time to show that and get involved. Start going to meetings. Start talking to people. Don't let your say go unheard. And start picking some leaders that truly represent what you want to see in your own community, if that makes sense. And in my opinion, more of the same is not that. All right. I love you guys. It's been about 30 minutes, a long time. So, as I say on Scorecast, keep writing, keep playing, making music, and I hope you learned something. And know that, again, this is coming from a place of love, a place of wanting this community to be healthy and strong and vibrant, and to not fall into that dark winter mentality of standing on street corners in costume. So anyway, all right, be safe, happy holidays, and we'll talk soon. All right, thanks for watching.